Jean-Francois, I guess we'll start with a new Leger poll. Came out last night. We briefly mentioned it on the show. Shows the PQ remains pretty much where it is. I guess the surprise here, maybe there's two. Quebec Solidaire sliding, and the Liberals, despite no leader, Marc Tanguay, their interim leader, picking up a couple of points. So give me your reaction to that.
Well, that's the same news because these are the same people. When you delve into the poll, you see that the loss of Québec solidaire is mainly amongst non-francophones. And the gain of the Liberals is totally amongst non-francophones. In fact, they lose a point amongst francophones. They were at 7, now they're at 6. But they gain amongst non-francophones. So we see that the Québec solidaire is losing a number of youngsters from 18 to 34 and is losing federalists. When we ask the question about sovereignty, in the last few months, there were a majority of voters of Québec solidaire who were against sovereignty, and now it's half and half. It means that my reading is that young federalist Anglos have left Québec solidaire to go to the only place, if they're progressive, they can't go to the Conservative Party of Quebec, the only place they can go, which is the Liberal Party of Quebec. And that's the news here. And so you have to wonder, why did they move? I mean, they've known for a while that officially the party was sovereigntist, but it's true that in the last, I'd say, 6 months, Québec solidaire has made a more, not completely visible, but a more forceful assertion of their sovereigntist stance. Is this one of the factors? Because if it was only the crisis of Québec solidaire, then we would see departures in all categories. But this is very specific. Non-Francophone, youngsters, federalists.
So did the PQ lose any of those in these numbers?
No. It's just a matter between the Liberals and the Solidaire. In fact, the PQ has lost a bit overall, but they're gaining within the Francophone vote. Now they're up to 40% in the Francophone vote.
I wonder, too, if maybe part of the surprise here, or maybe this is good news for CAQ, is the fact they haven't gotten worse. I mean, they seem to have pretty much settled where they were.
Well, they settled. They lost a couple of points, but they settled. And, well, one thing that is to be confirmed is that they would have gained 9 points in the Quebec City area. And all analysts today were saying, we don't know why. There's no reason.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing has happened in the last month to make them more acceptable to Quebec City voters that have been infuriated by their reversals of the third link.
By the way, speaking of Quebec City, I saw an announcement today. I didn't see the whole thing. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was out there today along with a couple of ministers saying they'd be spending $1 billion, did I see this right, to preserve the historic bridge in Quebec City?
Over 25 years. So it's $1 billion over 25 years. The Canadian government will pay 60% of the sum. Quebec government will pay about 20%, 25%, and the CN, Canadian National, will pay 15%. So listen, this is great news because it's been festering for decades. In 1995, Jean Chrétien sold the bridge to the CN for $1. And today the CN sold it back to Ottawa for $1. So nobody made a buck. But the whole point was the amount needed to repaint, refurbish the bridge. At the beginning, the CN was supposed to do it, and then they thought it was much more. They thought it would be $60 or $70 million. Then they said it would be $100. They say they wouldn't do it because they only used it once in a while for a train, and so the bulk of the usage was for really the Quebec using it for cars, and so it took years and years of negotiations to come to this conclusion, which I think is a pretty good deal for the CN that will not pay as much as some would think they would have to pay. But basically, I mean, we have a deal, and that's what's important.
Yeah, I'm sure there's nothing political in this, is there? That the federal government walks into Quebec City to make this announcement and realize its popularity or support in Quebec City is actually not what it was before. In fact, they're not. I think the last federal poll I saw, they actually trail in Quebec City.
Yeah, they're trailing, to the Conservatives very much so. But there was never any doubt that this was a federal issue. The bridge was built by the Canadian government, like the Champlain Bridge here.
Mm-hmm.
It was a deal between a federal entity, used to be a nationalized entity, which is CN, that is now private. So there was no doubt that the bulk of the responsibility was in Ottawa's file.
I was going to say the timing is interesting.
The timing is interesting, but, it won't flip millions or thousands of votes, but at least they can say in the Quebec City area that they've delivered on a very tough case, which is the bridge, and they delivered also in making the Lévis shipbuilding enterprise one of the official shipbuilders of the Canadian
government, right?
Naval Initiative, which was a big deal because Irving and others were fighting tooth and nail for that never to happen.
Fair enough. All right, let me ask you this other story. So this came up last week. Franco-Ontario MP Francis Drouin calling a couple of Quebec language researchers, I can't use the word, he called them full of it, and I think we know what that means. And he's been actually getting now support from other Franco-Ontarians. And I'm curious, I know there were calls at the beginning. First of all, use that kind of language. People stand up and go, you shouldn't use it, you should resign. Where are you on this story?
Well, I think it was very disgraceful for him to do that. Now, I perfectly understand why the Franco-Ontarian Association is supporting him, because despite this outrageous comment, he's been an ally of the Franco-Ontarians over the years, and they don't have that many, and they can't spare an ally. And I think, that was in good form for the Franco-Ontarians to say, listen, we're not commenting on this specific thing that he did, but we're saying he's a good ally of ours, and we want to keep him there. And so I think that's fair. That's very good.
Last thing I will ask you, we've been talking most of the afternoon back and forth, asking our listeners as well, reaction to that ruling today by a Quebec judge not to grant McGill an injunction to dismantle the encampment that's now been there for 2.5 weeks. I just wondered what you thought about that today.
Well, I think there was no way they would win an emergency injunction, which was what they were asking for. They might win a permanent one, but an emergency, you get it when there's some irreversible damage to something that will happen. And the problem with the McGill request is that these demonstrators or campers are too nice. They are too nice. And so McGill doesn't have a case. They don't block the entry. They don't fight with anyone. And so in terms of an emergency injunction, that can't be the case. That at a permanent, and one of the parties tried to argue in front of the judge that, the encampment now, a peaceful encampment, is now an extension of the constitutionally protected right to free expression. And the judge said, listen, we will not decide this here and now, but you can try and make this case in a permanent injunction, then we would have this discussion. So there we are.
So I understand that is going to be the date set for that, I think, is May 21st. McGill will be back in court, I imagine, between now and I guess at that point to try to get a permanent injunction. What do you say to people, Jean-Francois? Because I kept hearing it from texters today. Does this kind of open a door, embolden anyone to just go on anyone else's property and say there, as long as they're peaceful and not hurting anybody, they can just be wherever they want, whenever they want? Well,
if you're blocking an economic let's say rail, we have these encampments on rail from native groups. That's different because you're having an impact on the economy. If you block circulation, if you do any of these things, then the case for removal is greater. But we had a precedent here a couple of years ago during the Wall Street
Occupy Montreal, yeah.
Occupy Montreal, Occupy Wall Street. I mean, this lasted until winter took care of the encampment, because they weren't blocking anything. This one is in the spring, so winter is not going to make them leave anytime soon. But And the further argument they can use is this is a university campus. So this is a place of expression and debate. At the end, then a judge has to decide whether or not 2 months of doing that on a private property, and there's no doubt, even in this judgment today, that they're infringing on the free use of the private property of McGill. But then the judge has to decide how far can he allow an extension of freedom of expression if it doesn't cause harm to others. I'm not sure what to say. I'm not saying I have a position, but I'm saying that as long as it's peaceful, I wouldn't want to see police with riot gear and horses get into that.
Yeah, and I think most people would agree with that, regardless of what side of this debate you're on. I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. All right, Jean-Francois, thank you, merci, appreciate it.
Merci, à bientôt.